The thing you don't say. Christopher was standing in the living room doorway with a folded sheet of paper in his hand. His face looked pale in the lamplight. Not exactly angry, though anger was part of it. Something tighter than anger. Something rehearsed. Maggie sat in her chair with her back straight and both hands resting on her knees, as if posture alone might keep the moment from turning into something worse. The room felt heavy, sealed shut around them. The television was off. The dishwasher had finished an hour ago. Even the air conditioning seemed to have lowered itself in respect for the tension. Christopher said, "No, I talked to an attorney who handles online exploitation of seniors." Maggie looked first at the paper, then at his face. "Are you suing me?" "No," his jaw flexed once. "I'm trying to protect you, even if you don't want me to." The silence after that was so complete she could hear the hallway clock ticking. Somewhere outside, the pool equipment gave a low mechanical hum. Maggie didn't move right away. Then she stood. She crossed the room, opened the front door, and stepped back from it. Warm evening air pressed into the house, dry and still. The porch light was already on, throwing a neat yellow shape across the walkway. "Then don't protect me anymore," she said. Christopher didn't move. He stayed where he was, one hand still holding the paper, and for a second his face changed. Not much. Just enough for something under the anger to show through. Fear, maybe, or shock. Or the sudden realization that this had gone somewhere he had not expected it to go. But Maggie didn't take the words back. 9 months earlier, Maggie was 64, and it had just been 4 years since her husband died. She woke at 3:47 in the morning and didn't know why. She lay still for a few seconds, listening for a reason. A sound outside, a dream she had already forgotten. The air conditioning changing pitch. But there was nothing. Just the dark room, the outline of the dresser, the pale strip of curtain at the window, and the smooth, untouched half of the bed beside her. That side of the bed was always worse before dawn. In daylight, she could make the bed quickly and leave the room. She could choose not to look too closely. She could water the roses, fold towels, answer emails from women at church, stand in the kitchen, and decide what one person ought to cook for dinner. But at 3:47 in the morning, there was no defense against a flat pillow and a sheet that had stayed undisturbed all night. She sat up, reached for her robe, and went to the kitchen. The tile was cool under her feet. She turned on only the light above the sink and the one over the stove. The kitchen appeared in pieces. White counters, a bowl with 2 lemons beginning to soften. The coffee maker. The dark rectangle of the sliding doors beyond the breakfast nook. She made coffee by habit. Scoop, pour, switch. The small domestic sounds seemed louder than they should have. Then she carried the mug to the table by the window and sat, looking out at the pool. At that hour, the water looked black. Not blue, not inviting, not expensive. Just black, like a neat absence cut into the yard. The patio chairs were still. The hedge along the back wall was only a darker strip of shadow. Nothing moved. Maggie wrapped both hands around the mug. There was a sentence in her head that no one had let her say in 4 years. Not because anyone had been cruel, that would have been easier. Christopher asked if she was okay. Brooke brought things. Women from church had come after the funeral with casseroles and muffins and the kind of faces people arrange when grief belongs to someone else. Everybody had said the correct things. Call if you need anything, you're not alone. One day at a time. But nobody had made room for the thing underneath all that politeness. Nobody had asked a question and then stayed still long enough to hear an honest answer. Maggie looked at the dark pool. Then she looked at her phone. TikTok was on it because Ava had installed it months earlier, laughing while she did. "Grandma, you can't only have Facebook. That is not a personality," she had said, sprawled sideways on Maggie's couch with one sneaker already off. Maggie hadn't used the app much. A few cooking videos, a dog in rain boots, a woman alphabetizing spices with a level of commitment that seemed aggressive. Now Maggie opened it. For a moment, she only stared at the screen. Then she pressed record. Her face came up at once, too close, too bare, too awake for an hour when nobody should have to look at themselves. She almost stopped, almost set the phone down and let the sentence remain where it had lived for 4 years. Inside her, unspoken in any place where it might come back answered. Instead, she said, "I don't know what to do with 8 hours every day." That was all. No introduction, no music, no second take. She posted it before she could decide it was foolish. Then she set the phone down beside her mug and looked back out at the pool. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. Why would it? She was a 64-year-old widow sitting in a kitchen before dawn, speaking one sentence into an app, mostly populated, as far as she could tell, by teenagers dancing, women holding skincare products under flattering lights, and men explaining tools in tones of unwarranted confidence. She drank her coffee. It was a little too hot, then a little too bitter. After a minute, she picked up the phone and checked. 12 views. Maggie frowned, not out of disappointment, out of surprise. 12 actual people? That seemed unreasonable. She refreshed the screen. 17. She put the phone back down. A few minutes later, while rinsing her mug in the sink, she checked again. 47 views. 3 likes. She stood perfectly still. The numbers remained there, small and absurd and undeniable. 47, 3. Then she saw there was a comment. She tapped it. It was from a woman she didn't know. The profile picture was too tiny to make out, but the comment said, "I feel this more than you know." Maggie read it twice. Then she saw another one. "My dad died last year, thank you for saying this." The kitchen changed around her then, though nothing in it actually moved. The same dim light above the sink. The same black pool outside, the same coffee grounds cooling in the machine. But something in the room had shifted. Someone had heard her, not interrupted her, not reassured her too quickly, not translated what she meant into something more manageable. Heard her. Maggie sat back down at the table and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. The tears just came, steady and immediate, and she pressed her fingers under her eyes as if that might stop them. It didn't. For the first time since her husband died, someone had listened. After that, the videos came in irregular little bursts. Not every day. She was not trying to build anything. She didn't know enough about hashtags or engagement windows or whatever else Ava had once explained, with the solemnity of a young person discussing serious civic procedure. Maggie only knew that after the first video, the silence in the house felt less absolute. So a few days later, she made another one. This time, she stood at the kitchen counter in a clean blouse and said, "Nobody tells you how strange dinner is when there's only one plate to make." That one got a few hundred views. A week later, she sat on the back patio near sunset and said that people brought so many casseroles after funerals that grief started to smell like overcooked noodles and canned soup. She added quickly that she was grateful, because she was, but that there had to be a less cream-based way to express love. That one got several thousand views and made a surprising number of people laugh. Comments appeared from women in Michigan and Nevada and Florida. Men too. Widows, widowers, adult daughters, nurses. A college student whose profile picture showed braces and tired eyes. People wrote things to her they might not have said across a church folding table or in a grocery line. "My husband died 3 years ago, and I still hide in the laundry room at 5 p.m. The casseroles are real. God help us, the casseroles are real. You sound like my grandmother. I miss her. Thank you for saying things the pretty grief books never say." Maggie answered some of them. Not all. She was old enough to know that not every open door should stay open. But she answered enough to feel the shape of something forming there. A place where people said one true thing, and other people did not rush to cover it with neat language. By the time spring began to heat up for real, she had 500 followers, then 2,000, then 10. One evening, she made a video sitting at the patio table with the pool lights on behind her, their reflections breaking and reforming in the water. She had not planned to say anything especially important. She only meant to mention the long stretch between dinner and bed, those 2 or 3 hours that felt larger since Frank died. But once she hit record, she said, "Sometimes I sit next to my phone and realize I'm not waiting for it to ring. I'm waiting to matter enough for someone to think of me without being reminded." She almost deleted it. Instead, she posted it and went to bed. In the morning, the video had been shared more times than she knew what to do with. By lunch, it had over 500,000 views. The comments came faster than she could read them. "I called my mom after seeing this. I wish I could bring you coffee. You make me miss my grandmother in the best and worst way. I'm 23 and this scared me so much I texted my dad. Would you mind if I thought of you as my internet grandma?" Maggie laughed at that one. Then, unexpectedly, cried a little. Then laughed again because it seemed excessive to do both over a phone propped against the sugar jar. One woman wrote, "Can you make a video about what to say when you haven't called your mother in months?" Maggie thought about that for a long while before replying in a new video. Ask her what she had for breakfast. People can answer breakfast before they can answer hurt. That video spread too. She was recognized twice in public after that, once by a cashier at Home Goods, once by a woman in scrubs in the produce aisle at Safeway who said with almost comic shyness, "Are you the lady who talks about the evenings?" Maggie had said, "I suppose I am." The woman had laughed and then cried, both so quickly that Maggie didn't know what protocol applied. She hugged her beside the avocados. When Maggie got home that day, she stood in the kitchen with the grocery bags still on the counter and thought, "This is ridiculous." Then she thought, no, not ridiculous, only new. Christopher's Sunday visits had settled into a shape after Frank died and had never really changed. He came at 2 o'clock. Not around 2, not in the afternoon at 2. If traffic delayed him, he texted. If one of the kids had practice first, they came at 3:30 instead, but he always specified it in advance, as if confirming a service appointment. He stayed an hour and a half, sometimes a little less. He asked if she was doing okay, usually more than once. He brought something practical with him nearly every time: groceries, batteries, a pharmacy pickup, a folder of paperwork, a recommendation for someone to fix something she had not yet admitted needed fixing. Brooke came too, most weeks. She was polite, attractive, and faintly preoccupied in the way people were when the better part of them lived in schedules and performance. She always kissed Maggie's cheek. She always complimented something: the roses, a blouse, the lemon loaf. Her home looked effortless in the way magazines did, and Maggie had the uncomfortable suspicion that even Brooke's casualness required advanced planning. The children came depending on sports and moods and whatever else ruled children's lives now. Logan, 8, entered rooms like a dropped tennis ball, bright, fast, impossible to ignore. Ava, 12, had become sardonic in the efficient, half-bored way of girls her age, though she still had surprising pockets of sweetness that appeared without warning and vanished as quickly. At first, Maggie had thought the visits meant the family was holding together after loss. Then she thought they were all doing their best. Then, sometime in the 4th year, she understood something quieter and less flattering. They were not really coming to see her. They were coming to make sure she was still being seen. There was a difference. On one Sunday in May, Christopher arrived at 2:01. Maggie was already by the front window. Heat lay over the street like glass. The roses in the front bed had survived better than expected. She had trimmed them 2 days earlier and could still smell the faint green bitterness of cut stems each time she passed the side yard. The SUV rolled into the driveway. She opened the door before they knocked. "Hi, Mom," Christopher said, leaning in for a quick hug that landed mostly on her shoulder. He smelled of sunscreen and expensive soap. "Hi, sweetheart." He held up a white pharmacy bag. "Picked up your prescription." "Oh, thank you." Brooke stepped forward and kissed Maggie's cheek. "Your yard looks beautiful." "It always does when somebody else is standing in it," Maggie said. Brooke smiled, not fully sure if that had been a joke. "Well, it does." Logan squeezed past them immediately. "Can I go outside?" "In a minute," Christopher said. Ava entered more slowly, carrying her phone in a canvas tote bag with a dance logo on it. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, darling." The family moved through the house in the same choreography they always used. Christopher scanned without seeming to scan. Brooke settled onto the sofa. Logan drifted toward the back door in all possible motion. Ava lingered in the doorway between rooms as if full commitment to being anywhere would be socially compromising. Maggie went to the kitchen for iced tea. When she returned with the tray, Christopher rose at once and took it from her. "I've got it." "I know you do," she said. He gave her a quick look, but if he heard anything in that beyond the tray, he chose not to answer it. They sat. For a while, the conversation stayed on safe surfaces. School was winding down. Logan might do tennis camp. Ava's class had a field trip that apparently involved too much walking and not enough air conditioning. Brooke had a charity dinner that evening and still wasn't sure which dress she was wearing. Christopher had a client who insisted on texting paragraphs instead of using email like a civilized person. Maggie responded where needed, smiled where expected, refilled glasses. At some point, Christopher asked, "You doing okay, Mom?" It was the first time. "Yes." "You sure?" "Yes." He nodded before the answer had even quite settled in the room. Brooke crossed one leg under the other and opened her phone for a moment, then set it face down when she noticed Maggie noticing. "The Jennings fundraiser got moved indoors," she said. "Apparently the golf club's patio misters aren't working." "That sounds devastating," Christopher said. Brooke gave him a look. "For the women wearing silk, yes." Logan laughed from the floor, though he clearly had not followed the conversation. Ava rolled her eyes in a manner so practiced it was almost elegant. The house remained bright and orderly around them. Cushions fluffed, side tables polished, family photos arranged in frames Maggie dusted weekly whether anyone came or not. Frank smiling from 3 different decades on 3 different walls. Christopher at graduation. Christopher at his wedding. The children holding pumpkins one October long enough ago that Ava still had missing front teeth. Maggie often felt on Sundays that she was hosting people inside a museum of their own family. Then her phone buzzed on the end table beside her. She glanced down automatically. A direct message. The profile picture belonged to a young woman in a graduation cap. Maggie recognized the username vaguely. The girl had commented before, always politely, always in complete sentences. Maggie opened it. "I don't know if you read these, but your video from last night kept me from doing something stupid. I was sitting in my car and I watched the part where you said, 'Evenings can lie to you.' I just wanted to thank you for staying." Maggie read the message twice. The room around her went quieter. Though Christopher was still speaking to Logan about not putting sticky fingers on the patio glass, and Brooke was asking Ava whether she'd packed the right shoes for Monday. But the message held Maggie in place. She typed carefully, "I'm glad you stayed too." Then she paused. "Please tell one real person how tonight felt." She nearly erased "please" and replaced it with something gentler, less directive. Then she left it. Before she could answer, another notification slid up under it. A comment on her latest video. "Grandma, how are you today?" Maggie smiled before she meant to. "What's that?" Christopher might have asked. He was standing close enough to see that she was smiling at her phone. Instead, he said, "We've got to leave by 3:30. The Jennings thing starts at 5. Brooke sighed. "I still have to steam the blue dress." Maggie set the phone down face down on the table. No one asked what had made her smile. Christopher moved on to asking whether the landscaper had been paid, whether the air conditioning had been serviced, whether the church directory issue had gotten sorted out, whether she'd opened the insurance letter he'd mentioned last week. Maggie answered yes, 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 not yet. Each question landed with the same polished concern. He meant well. That was the difficulty. Almost every hurt in this room came with good intentions attached. Outside, Logan and Ava went into the yard for a while. Logan bounced a ball too close to the house. Christopher got up to tell him not to. Brooke checked the time and frowned in the direction of obligations. Maggie took empty glasses to the sink and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, looking at the reflection of the kitchen in the dark window over the counter. From the living room, Christopher called, "Mom?" "Yes." "You still good on groceries this week?" "Yes." "You need anything from us?" It was a generous question, a decent one that would sound loving repeated to other people. Maggie dried her hands on the dish towel and looked toward the living room before answering. "No, I'm fine." She had learned over the years that the truth would only create work. If she said she was lonely, Christopher would hear accusation where she meant ache. He would feel guilty, then defensive, then managerial. He would suggest clubs, travel groups, classes at the community center, church committees, maybe a smaller place with more people around. He would turn feeling into logistics because logistics were how he kept himself from drowning in anything less solvable. So she said she was fine. By 3:20, the visit had begun to fold itself shut. Brooke gathered cups and napkins. Ava found one shoe and then the other without assistance, but with visible resentment that shoes existed at all. Logan asked for a snack for the car. Christopher checked his watch twice and tried not to make it obvious. Maggie walked them to the front door. At the threshold, Christopher asked the final version. "You all set this week?" He said it with one hand already on the doorframe. Maggie looked at him. At 42, he was a handsome man in a careful way. Good haircut, good watch, good posture. The look of someone whose life had been expensive to build and therefore had to be protected from disorder. There were moments, though, when she could still see the boy who used to come into the kitchen at 7 in the morning, asking if she could sign the permission slip he'd forgotten twice already. The boy who had once cried because Frank missed one Little League game and had then been so ashamed of the crying that he refused dessert. She could have said it then. "No, I'm not all set. I wake up before dawn because the house is too silent. I talk to strangers because they wait for my answers. You ask if I'm okay, and then stand up before I can become inconvenient." Instead, she smiled. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Drive safe." Relief passed across his face so quickly he may not have known it had shown. Brooke hugged Maggie one-armed, her purse already over her shoulder. "See you next Sunday. Unless there's the tournament," Ava said. "We'll figure it out," Brooke replied, sounding like someone discussing calendar weather. Logan yelled, "Bye, Grandma," from halfway down the walkway. Then, unexpectedly, Ava came back. She leaned in and kissed Maggie's cheek. "Your earrings are cute," she said. Before Maggie could answer, she was gone again. The SUV backed out of the driveway. Maggie stood at the open door and waved until the car turned the corner and disappeared. After that, the neighborhood resumed itself. A sprinkler clicked on 2 houses over. A dog barked once, then again. Somewhere down the block, a garage door opened and closed. The late afternoon light had begun to soften, though not by much. Arizona did not give up heat gracefully. Maggie stayed at the doorway one breath longer than necessary, then turned back inside. The house felt larger after they left. Not emptier, just larger. As if the rooms had quietly expanded to take back the space they had temporarily surrendered. A napkin lay folded on the coffee table. Logan's fingerprint marked the patio glass. Brooke's perfume lingered faintly in the hall. One sofa cushion still held the slant of Christopher's weight. Maggie picked up the glasses and carried them to the kitchen. Her phone was still on the side table where she had left it. When she unlocked it, there were 4 new comments and 2 more messages. She read the comments first. "I called my mom because of you. Please keep posting. You make me feel less crazy. I wish my grandmother had talked like this. Grandma, how are you today? Maggie stood in the middle of the kitchen and read that line twice. Not you okay? Asked while looking at a watch. Not you need anything? Asked from a doorway. How are you today? A real question, small maybe, but open. She set the phone against the sugar jar on the counter and pressed record. The kitchen behind her was ordinary. Dish towel on the oven handle. Lemons in the bowl. Late light at the edge of the sliding door. The blue strip of pool water beyond the glass. For a second, she saw herself the way her family likely saw her. Widow, retired teacher, nice house, stable enough, checked on weekly. Then the red light blinked on. Maggie looked into the camera and said, "Today I feel like I'm still here." She paused, not for effect, only because she wanted to be exact. "And today," she said, "and that's enough." She stopped the recording before she could improve it into something less true. The discovery. Christopher arrived early because a client had sent over a contract marked urgent, and he needed a bigger screen than his phone. He mentioned it before he was fully inside. "Mom, do you still have that iPad? I just need to check something for work." Maggie, coming from the kitchen with a bowl of grapes no one would finish, stopped and looked toward the counter. "Yes, I had it this morning." She found it propped beside the sugar jar and handed it to him without thinking. "There. Thanks." The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and pool water. Outside, Logan was already asking if he could go swimming, even though nobody had brought suits. Brooke was saying no in the tone she used when she had already answered once in the car. Ava had drifted toward the patio with her phone and a glass of iced tea. Sundays had a shape now. Everybody seemed to know where to stand. Christopher sat in the armchair by the front window and woke the screen. Maggie went back to the kitchen. She cut cheddar into squares and arranged crackers on a plate. She heard Brooke opening cabinets, looking for glasses. Logan thudded toward the patio door. Someone laughed outside. The air conditioning came on. Then the room went too quiet. Maggie paused with the knife in her hand. "Everything load?" she called. A beat passed. "Yeah," Christopher said. "Just a second." She went back to the cheese. What he had opened was not his email. TikTok filled the screen, bright and immediate. For a second, he only registered the app itself and the small irritation of finding it open on a work device. Then he saw the page. A profile. A picture of his mother. A line under her name. Widowhood, evenings, and other things nobody tells you. And under that, 47 2K followers. He stared at the number. 47,000. There were video thumbnails below. His mother in the kitchen. His mother on the patio, his mother crying, his mother laughing. He could have closed it. He didn't. He tapped the first video. The kitchen was dim. Early morning light had not yet arrived. Maggie looked tired and barefaced in a robe, hair flattened on one side. "I don't know what to do with 8 hours every day," she said. That was all. The clip ended. Christopher sat still, the iPad cool in his hand. 8 hours. He knew what she meant, or thought he did. Frank had been dead 4 years. Maggie lived alone in a house too big for one person. Of course, time had changed shape on her. But hearing her say it out loud to strangers did something to him he couldn't name quickly enough. He tapped another video. This one had hundreds of thousands of views. Maggie sat outside at dusk with the pool lights behind her. "The last time I held my husband's hand," she said, "I knew it was probably the last time, and I still said something stupid. I asked if he wanted lip balm." She gave a small laugh, then pressed her fingers under one eye and looked away for a moment. Christopher stopped the video before it finished. From the kitchen came Brooke's voice. "Do you want the grapes out now?" Maggie answered, "They're already washed." The normalness of it made something inside him pull tight. He opened a third video. This one was lighter. Maggie stood at the counter, laughing over a photo a follower had sent her. An orange cat stared at the camera with deep offense in its face. "One of you sent me this because you said he looks how I feel when church women ask me to join another committee." She laughed again. The comments moved too fast for him to read all of them, but he caught pieces. "I love you, Internet Grandma. Protect her at all costs. You remind me of my mom. Please keep posting." He backed out to the profile page. 47,000 followers. His first thought was simple and ugly. Who else has seen this? Colleagues, clients, people from church, Brooke's friends, parents from school, neighbors. Then another thought came in behind it, harder to look at. If she's this lonely, how did I miss it? He shut the screen off. "Christopher," Maggie called. "Did it open?" He turned it back on, opened his email, and stared at a contract without reading a word. "Yeah," he said. "It's fine." He scrolled through 2 pages of legal language, saw none of it, then locked the iPad again. When Maggie came in with the cheese plate, he stood too quickly. "All done?" she asked. "Yeah," he handed it back. "Thanks, Mom." She took it with her usual trust. If she saw anything in his face, she didn't show it. Logan came in from outside with wet hands for no clear reason and asked if there were chips. Brooke followed, already reaching for a napkin before he touched anything else. Only if you dry off first, she said. I'm not wet. You are very obviously wet. Ava came in last, glanced at her father once, and then looked away. Christopher picked up his keys. Maggie noticed immediately. You're leaving? I should get back, he said. I forgot I've got something to finish tonight. Brooke turned toward him. Now? Yeah. The room shifted a little. Not dramatically, just enough for Maggie to feel something pass through it. You don't have to rush off, she said. It's fine, I'll call you this week. He heard the line as he said it and hated how practiced it sounded. Maggie looked at him for a second longer than usual. All right. At the door, Brooke hugged her quickly. Logan shouted goodbye. Ava leaned into Maggie's hand when it touched her shoulder, then stepped away at once, as though she hadn't. Christopher did not meet his mother's eyes for long on the way out. The heat hit him as soon as he stepped outside. The driveway smelled of hot concrete and dried dust. He got into the SUV and shut the door harder than he meant to. Through the windshield, he could see Maggie still standing at the front door, one hand on the frame, watching them leave. He backed out anyway. The drive home took 20-some minutes. Logan and Ava argued in the back over a charger cable. Brooke answered one text, then put her phone face down. You okay? She asked. Fine. She waited. Did the contract thing blow up? No. Then what? Nothing. At a red light, Logan asked if they could get smoothies. No, Christopher said. Too sharp. The car went quiet. Brooke looked out the window. Even Logan knew enough not to ask again. When they pulled into the driveway at home, Brooke unbuckled and turned to him. You coming? In a minute. She looked at him, then at the house. Okay. The kids got out first. Brooke followed. Christopher stayed where he was with the engine off. The inside of the SUV had gone warm. He could hear the small metal ticking of the hood cooling. Across the street, a man in golf clothes was hosing down a driveway that did not need hosing down. Christopher picked up his phone and called Brooke. She answered from inside the house. I'm in the kitchen, she said. Why are you calling me from the driveway? Christopher looked through the windshield at nothing. Mom has TikTok. There was silence. Then Brooke said carefully, what do you mean she has TikTok? I mean, she has an account. A lot of people have accounts. She posts videos. Another silence, longer this time. You mean your mom is making videos of herself? Yes. And you just found this out? Yes. What kind of videos? Christopher let out a breath through his nose. The kind where 47,000 people watch her talk about Dad dying. Brooke didn't answer right away. How many people? 47,000. Oh my God. He hated hearing the words out loud. They made the whole thing sound both ridiculous and more real. Brooke lowered her voice. Are you sure? I saw it. And what exactly is she saying? He looked down at his hand around the phone. That she's lonely. That she sits by the phone. That she doesn't know what to do with her day. Stuff about Dad, personal things. Brooke exhaled. She stopped. Humiliating, he thought. Concerning, he corrected it to himself. Did she know you saw it? Brooke asked. I don't think so. Oh, Christopher. There was something in her tone that irritated him immediately. What? Nothing, I'm just trying to think. Well, think faster. Don't do that. He leaned back in the seat. Do what? Act like I'm the problem because I'm asking questions. He looked out at the street again. Inside the house, he could see Brooke moving through the kitchen window, one pale hand braced on the counter, head turned away from the rooms where the kids were. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going over there Tuesday. Why Tuesday? Because tomorrow won't work and I'm in court Monday. That's not what I meant. He said nothing. Brooke spoke more carefully now. Maybe just don't go in already angry. I'm not angry. She waited. Fine, he said. I'm angry. About what? He almost said the embarrassment. Almost said the comments. Almost said what if people we know have seen it. Instead, he said, she's putting family business online. Brooke did not answer that quickly enough to comfort him. Then she said, or she's talking somewhere people answer back. Christopher shut his eyes for a second. That's not fair. I didn't say it to be fair. From inside the house came Logan yelling for a snack and Ava telling him to stop touching her charger. Ordinary life, loud and careless, moving forward in rooms Christopher had paid for and furnished and maintained. He was good at ordinary life, more dependable than his father had ever been in practical ways. More organized, more present, he would have said. So why had his mother ended up speaking to strangers like a woman nobody really asked about? He pushed the thought aside almost as soon as it formed. This can't keep going, he said. Brooke did not argue, but she didn't agree either. Talk to her first. I'm talking to her. No, Brooke said, you're planning something. He ended the call a minute later and went inside because staying in the car was beginning to feel childish. The evening moved forward. Showers, homework, Brooke changing dresses for the fundraiser, Logan refusing salmon on principle, Ava eating around the asparagus. At dinner, Logan asked, "Why doesn't Grandma come here more?" "Eat," Brooke said. Christopher said, "She likes being at her house." Ava looked up from her plate. "Or nobody asks?" The table went quiet. "What does that mean?" Logan asked. "Nothing," Ava said, and went back to her food. Christopher looked at his daughter, but her face had already shut. Later, there was the fundraiser. Donors. Name tags. Men who wanted legal advice for free. Women who spoke in warm tones sharpened by competition. Brooke moved through it beautifully, smiling in exactly the right places. Christopher did what he always did. He stood where he was useful. He shook hands. He answered questions. He made himself agreeable. At 11:30, the house was finally quiet. Brooke had gone to bed. One of her earrings still lay on the bathroom counter. The dishwasher was running. The downstairs office smelled faintly of paper and lamp heat. Christopher sat at the desk with his laptop open. On the shelf behind the monitor was a framed photo of Frank and Maggie by the pool years ago, both of them squinting into the sun. His father had one arm around Maggie's shoulders. Christopher had never thought much about that photograph before. Tonight he hated it on sight. He opened a new email, stared at the blank screen. He could not write what was actually inside him. He could not write, "I saw who you are when we're not around." He could not write, "I didn't know it had gotten this bad." He could not write, "I am ashamed, and some part of me thinks that means I'm guilty." So he wrote something smaller and colder. "Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm coming over Tuesday evening. Please don't post any new videos until then." He read it once, almost removed please, left it in. Then he looked at the clock on the laptop, 11:47 p.m. He hit send before he could revise it into something softer or less true. Across town, Maggie was still awake. She had changed into her nightgown, taken off her earrings, and put a glass of water beside the bed, but sleep had not come. The house felt different after Sunday visits, as though the rooms needed time to resettle after being briefly used. When her phone buzzed, she knew before she picked it up. Not the exact words, just the day. She opened the email and read it once. Then again, "Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm coming over Tuesday evening. Please don't post any new videos until then." Her hand shifted slightly against the sheet. So, he had seen it. Maggie sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her lap. The room around her stayed ordinary. The dresser, the chair with tomorrow's clothes folded over the back, the half-open bathroom door, the dark window over the yard. She was not surprised. That was the part that tired her most. Not fear, not even hurt in any new form. Only the old, familiar knowledge that being seen in one place would sooner or later become a problem in another. Tuesday, she thought. She set the phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the email remained in the room anyway. The first confrontation. Christopher arrived at 7:30 exactly. Maggie had already turned on the lamp beside the sofa and the smaller one near the piano, leaving the overhead lights off. At night, the living room looked kinder that way. The corners softened. The framed photographs on the mantel became shapes before they became faces. She had set out tea and a plate of butter cookies on the coffee table without thinking too hard about it. Her hands had done it while her mind was somewhere else. When the doorbell rang, she was in the kitchen rinsing a spoon she had already rinsed once. She dried her hands, smoothed the front of her blouse, and opened the door. Christopher stood on the porch in his work clothes, jacket off, tie loosened but still on. He held a folded sheet of paper in one hand. The porch light flattened him a little. He looked tired and determined in ways that did not go well together. "Hi, Mom." "Hi." She stepped aside. He came in, bringing with him the faint smell of night air in the car. He looked at the tea service on the coffee table before he looked at her. "You made tea?" "Yes." "I'm okay." "All right." She closed the door behind him. Christopher remained standing for a second, as if he had expected her to say something else. Then he crossed to the chair opposite the sofa and sat. Maggie sat where she usually did, at one end of the sofa, hands folded in her lap. The folded paper stayed in his hand a moment longer before he set it on his knee. Outside, the pool lights had come on. Their reflection trembled faintly on the glass doors at the back of the room. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then stopped. Christopher said, "I saw your videos." Maggie did not answer. He had chosen those words carefully. Not, "I found your account." Not, "I need to ask you about something," just that. A statement laid between them. Maggie looked at him and then at the paper on his knee. Christopher waited. The room held still. He seemed to expect the silence to break in some polite, familiar way. For her to give him a smaller version of the truth. For her to help him begin. Maggie did not. So he picked up the folded paper and opened it. The creases were sharp. "I wrote down a few things," he said. "Just some options." Maggie looked at the page, then back at his face. Christopher cleared his throat. There's a book club at the public library on Thursdays. They do one specifically for seniors. And St. Matthew's has a volunteer program with the hospital gift shop. Brooke also found a yoga class. I don't want yoga. He stopped. It was the first thing she had said since he came in. Her voice had not risen. It was almost mild. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. It was just one idea, he said. Maggie said nothing. Christopher glanced at the tea again, then back to his paper, as if his place in the conversation might be there. There's also a grief group at the church in Paradise Valley, he said, and a docent program at the Botanical Garden. Places where you could meet people, real people. The last two words sat in the room with more weight than he intended, or perhaps exactly as much. Maggie rested her hands more firmly together. She had stopped hearing the list halfway through. The paper itself had become louder than the words. The crisp little sound of it each time he adjusted his grip. A grown man arriving at his mother's house, with a prepared page of better ways for her to exist. Christopher went on. I'm not saying you have to do all of this. I just think there are healthier options than this. He made a small motion with the paper that seemed to stand in for TikTok, the internet, strangers, grief, embarrassment, whatever category he had made for it in his mind. Maggie looked at the untouched tea between them. Steam had already thinned. Christopher said, Mom. Still, she did not answer. The silence lengthened. It was not passive. He began to feel it as resistance, though he could not have said when that happened. He shifted in his chair. I'm trying to help. Maggie's face did not change. He went on anyway, because stopping would have required him to sit inside that look. You have no idea who these people are. You're talking about private things to strangers. There are people online who take advantage of older women. There are scams. There are older women. What? That's what you said. Her voice remained quiet. Older women. Christopher pressed his lips together. That's not the point. It usually is. He exhaled through his nose. Mom, come on. The room settled again. The quiet had begun to irritate him. It made him feel overdressed, overprepared, faintly ridiculous. He had come ready for persuasion, even for tears if necessary. He had not come ready for this steady refusal to make his job easier. He put the paper down on the coffee table beside the cookies. I watched several of them, he said. You're talking about Dad, about being lonely, about waiting by the phone. You have almost 50,000 followers. That isn't normal. Maggie looked at him for a long second. Then she asked very gently, Do you know the last time somebody asked me what I thought? Christopher blinked. The question did not sound like accusation. That was the worst part of it. It sounded almost curious, as if she were asking about weather, about dates, about a memory he might reasonably be expected to access. He frowned. What does that have to do with this? Maggie kept looking at him. He did not answer because he did not have one. Not an honest one. There had been practical questions, endless practical questions. Did she need groceries? Had she mailed the property tax check? Was the air conditioning making that noise again? Was she sleeping at all? Was she taking the vitamins the doctor recommended? What do you think? He couldn't remember. I'm serious, Mom, he said, and heard the edge in his own voice. This is not safe. Maggie's gaze moved briefly to the pool doors, where their reflections hovered over the dark glass. 47,000 people call me Internet Grandma, she said. They send me pictures of cats. They ask me if I slept better. One woman mailed me a lemon loaf recipe because I said the one from church was dry. That doesn't mean they're safe. No. Her agreement landed oddly. Christopher had been ready for argument. Not that. No, Maggie said again. Well, it doesn't. It means they see me. Christopher sat back. The lamp beside the piano threw a soft wedge of light along the carpet between them. He became aware of his hands, both of them clenched too tightly against his knees. He loosened them and then, irritated by the fact that he had noticed, folded his arms instead. Mom, these are strangers. Yes, you don't know anything about them. I know they wait for the answer. He stared at her. Maggie's face had not changed much, but something in it had. Some old courtesy had stepped aside. Christopher said, This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're acting like this is some kind of substitute for actual life. Maggie gave the faintest shake of her head. No, I'm acting like when someone asks how I am, I prefer it if they haven't already stood up before I answer. He looked at her as if she had slapped him. For a second, she thought he might actually hear it. Not accept it, but hear it. Instead, he leaned forward and picked up the paper again. There are people in this city, he said, too controlled now. There are programs, classes, volunteer groups, places you can go where this doesn't... He lifted the paper, then lowered it again. Where this isn't what you're relying on. Maggie looked at the list in his hand. Did Brooke find the yoga? He paused. What? The yoga class. Yes. Maggie nodded once. That sounds like Brooke. Christopher's mouth tightened. This isn't about Brooke. No, Maggie said. It's about me being arranged. That's not what's happening. She looked at the cookies he had refused, then at his tie, still hanging from his collar, as if he had not had enough time even to remove it before managing her. And what is happening? She asked. Christopher rose from the chair. Not all the way into anger yet, but no longer willing to stay seated beneath her questions. He walked a few steps toward the fireplace and turned back. What's happening, he said, is that you are putting personal family things on the internet, and I'm telling you, it's not a good idea. Family things? Yes, what family things? He stared at her. Dad dying, for one. Your father died. That's not what I mean. I know. Christopher's voice sharpened. You know exactly what I mean. Maggie stood then too. Not quickly, not dramatically. She set her hands against the edge of the sofa cushion first, then rose and faced him across the coffee table. The room was still tidy around them. The tea tray, the folded list, the plate of cookies. It looked like a visit had gone slightly wrong and might still be repaired. That was part of what made it unbearable. Christopher said, people watch these things. I'm aware. People we know could see them. There it was. Not the whole thing. Not even the deepest part, but something true enough to darken the room. Maggie's expression changed very little. Are you embarrassed because of me? She asked. Or because the neighbors might see you? Christopher went still. That's not fair, isn't it? I'm trying to protect you. He said it with force, but his hands gave him away. Both of them were tight at his sides, fingers curling and uncurling once against the fabric of his slacks. Maggie watched him. For years, she had helped him avoid certain truths by agreeing not to name them. That had been one of the quiet services motherhood could become if you kept doing it long enough. You learned where your child was fragile, and then you built furniture around it so they would not bruise themselves walking through the room. But she was tired. No, she said. Christopher blinked. No, Maggie repeated, you want to protect your image. The words landed with almost no emphasis. They did not need any. Christopher looked at her for a long second. It was long enough for denial to arrive, and long enough for it to fail. His face closed, then opened slightly, then settled into something harder because hardness was what he used when softer things became dangerous. He did not say she was wrong. Maggie saw that before he did. He turned away first, walked toward the front door, then stopped as if remembering he had not come to leave this quickly. The list was still on the coffee table. He snatched it up, folded it once without looking, and put it in his pocket. This is getting twisted, he said. Is it? Yes. How? Christopher let out a short breath that was almost a laugh and not warm at all. I come over here because I'm worried about you, and somehow that becomes me being selfish. You came over here with a handout. It was a list. Yes, a list of things you could do instead of telling strangers our business. Maggie looked at him. Our business. He was already at the door now, one hand on the knob. He said, I don't know why you're doing this. That at least sounded true. Maggie did not go after him, did not soften, did not rescue him from the sentence by filling in the answer. Christopher opened the door. Warm night air moved into the room. The porch light threw a pale shape across the entryway tile. He looked back once, perhaps expecting her to follow him to the threshold the way she always had, to end the evening inside some version of habit. She remained where she was beside the sofa. Good night, Mom, he said. She did not answer until after a beat had passed. Good night, Christopher. He left. She heard his steps across the porch, then the car door, then the engine starting. A moment later, the headlights moved across the living room wall in a brief white sweep and were gone. After that, the house went very quiet. Maggie stood where she was until the silence changed shape. Then she sat down again on the sofa. The tea in her cup had gone cold. She picked it up anyway and held it in both hands without drinking. On the coffee table, one cookie had shifted on the plate when Christopher grabbed the list. That bothered her more than it should have, the little disorder of it. The room still held him faintly. His aftershave, the movement he had brought in, the sense of furniture having been used in anger. Maggie did not cry. She looked toward the dark glass doors at the back of the room. Her reflection looked older there, doubled over the pool light. For a few minutes, she sat without moving, the cold cup in her hand, listening to the refrigerator hum from the kitchen and the far-off sound of a television in somebody else's house. She thought of the yoga class on Brooke's screen, thought of library chairs arranged in circles, thought of the careful ugliness of real people. Then she set the teacup down. Her phone was beside the lamp. She picked it up, opened TikTok, and stared at her own face when the camera came on. The room behind her looked dim and respectable. Nothing in the frame suggested what had just happened except perhaps her mouth, which had not entirely gone back to normal. She hit record. She said first because she had not planned the sentence. Then she said, today my son told me I should take yoga. She paused. I hate yoga. That was all. 30 seconds, maybe less. She stopped the recording and looked at it once before posting. In the replay, her voice sounded drier than she felt, more amused. That was fine. Let them hear that version. She posted it and set the phone face down on the table. The room did not change, the tea was still cold, the cookie was still crooked on the plate. The house was still too large around one person. But something had crossed. Maggie sat back against the sofa and looked at the front door he had closed behind him. From now on, she thought, he would know there were places he could not follow her by simply arriving early and asking the right questions. She picked up the tea at last and drank it anyway. Brooke's lunch. Brooke called on Thursday morning just after 10, while Maggie was deadheading the yellow roses in the side yard. Maggie let it ring once longer than necessary before answering. The sun was already high enough to flatten the color out of everything. Gravel, stucco, leaves, the pale skin on her forearm where the gardening glove stopped. She tucked the pruning shears under one arm. Hello? Hi, Maggie. Brooke's voice had that bright carefulness it got when she was trying to sound spontaneous. Are you free for lunch today? Maggie looked at the rose bush as if it might have an opinion. Lunch? Yes, just us. Brooke gave a small laugh. I thought it might be nice. In 4 years, Brooke had never once invited her to lunch alone. She had invited her to things, certainly. School events, fundraisers, birthday dinners where Maggie sat 3 seats down from Christopher and across from a child who spilled Sprite. But not lunch, just the two of them on an ordinary weekday. Maggie shifted the phone to her other ear. Where? True Fooded, if that's okay, around noon? Of course it was somewhere with valet parking and clean wood tables and women who wore expensive sneakers with linen trousers. Yes, Maggie said that's fine. Wonderful. Brooke sounded relieved too quickly. I'll drive if you want. I can meet you there. Another tiny pause. Okay, Brooke said. See you at noon. When the call ended, Maggie stood in the yard with the silent phone in her hand and the shears pressing a cool line into her side. She knew what this was. Not every detail, not the exact phrases, but the shape of it. Christopher had gone to her first and failed. Now Brooke was being sent in through another door. Softer voice, better upholstery. Maggie bent and dropped 2 dry rose heads into the green waste bin. Part of her almost admired the sequence of it. Christopher with a list. Brooke with lunch. A family trying to solve a woman without ever asking if she wished to remain unsolved. Still, she went inside and changed. True Food Kitchen was cool in the polished way only expensive lunch places managed. Glass, pale wood, green plants arranged to look accidental. Servers who moved with the composed speed of people trained never to appear rushed. The room smelled faintly of citrus and roasted vegetables and somebody else's perfume. Brooke was already there. She stood when Maggie approached the hostess stand and gave her a quick hug. One arm, careful not to wrinkle either of them. She wore cream-colored slacks, a fitted sleeveless top, gold earrings the size of small coins, and sunglasses pushed up into her hair like punctuation. She looked, Maggie thought, as though she had dressed for a lunch where being seen mattered. Hi, Brooke said. You look pretty, Maggie smiled. Thank you. Brooke had chosen a table near the windows, not too exposed, not too hidden. Strategic seating. Maggie noticed these things now. Perhaps she always had. They sat, water arrived, menus followed. For a minute, they did what women were expected to do when unpleasantness had not yet officially begun. Brooke mentioned traffic on Scottsdale Road. Maggie said the heat had arrived early this year. Brooke complimented Maggie's blouse. Maggie asked after the children. Ava had a tournament coming up. Logan had developed a sudden loyalty to a hockey team despite never having seen ice in person. They spoke over the menus as though the menus were the point. When the server came, Brooke ordered a chopped salad with salmon and dressing on the side. Maggie ordered the turkey avocado sandwich because it was the only thing on the page that sounded like lunch instead of an idea of lunch. Great choice, Brooke told her, as if Maggie were a child selecting from a children's menu. The server left. Brooke rearranged her napkin. The restaurant around them stayed gently alive. Silverware against plates, low conversations, somebody laughing too hard 2 tables over, sunlight pressing against the windows without getting in. Brooke said, I'm glad you came. Maggie picked up her water glass. You invited me. Brooke smiled in a way that tried to read as warm and landed closer to braced. I know things have been tense. Maggie waited. Brooke folded her hands on the table. Her nails were pale pink, immaculate, square at the tips. Maggie remembered suddenly that Brooke used to be prettier in a looser, more careless way when she first met Christopher. She still had beauty now, but it had become work. Or maybe Maggie had simply gotten old enough to see the work in everything. Christopher told me you two had a hard conversation, Brooke said. That's one way to say it. Brooke glanced down, then back up. He's worried. Maggie said nothing. Brooke took that as permission to continue. We both are, actually. Online things can get strange very quickly. There are people who prey on vulnerable women, especially older women. Romance scams, money scams. People pretending to be emotionally invested when they're really just... Brooke, Maggie said. Brooke stopped. Have you watched my videos? The question landed gently. That seemed to make it harder. Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, then reached for her water. I've seen clips. Which ones? A pause. Brooke set the glass down carefully. Christopher told me what they're about. That wasn't my question. The server appeared then with the salads on one arm and Maggie's sandwich on a plate wide enough for decoration. Brooke smiled too brightly at her, thanked her, waited until she was gone again. Then she said, No, I haven't really watched them. Maggie nodded once. There it was. Brooke's face tightened almost imperceptibly, not because Maggie had said anything sharp, but because she hadn't. Silence could expose people faster than accusation if you let it sit long enough. Brooke picked up her fork and put it back down. That doesn't mean I can't be concerned. It means, Maggie said, that you're talking about something you haven't looked at. Brooke inhaled. Maggie, and you're talking about me, Maggie said, like I'm 12. Brooke sat back a little. That's not fair. Maggie unfolded her napkin and laid it across her lap. No, Brooke's voice remained low, but the effort in it had become visible. I asked you here because I thought maybe we could talk woman to woman. Maggie looked at her sandwich. The bread had grill marks. The fries were some sort of roasted potatoes trying not to be fries. About internet safety. About what's happening. What's happening, Maggie said, is that you're explaining my life to me without ever having watched me speak. Brooke flushed. Not dramatically. Just color rising through the powder and careful skincare and whatever else she used to make herself look untouched by effort. That's not what I'm doing. Maggie looked up. Then what are you doing? Brooke pressed her lips together. She was not a woman accustomed to being pinned to the exact shape of her own behavior. Maggie saw that much plainly. Brooke was skilled at glide. Tone, presentation, the mild redirection that turned discomfort into logistics. It was one of the reasons she fit so well in Scottsdale. People there preferred smooth surfaces, even when sinking. Brooke tried again. We're worried because once something is public, you can't control it. People can screen record, share things, take them out of context. Someone could take advantage of you. Someone could humiliate you. Maggie smiled a little, not because it was funny. Someone, you know what I mean? I do. Brooke picked up her fork at last and moved lettuce around without eating it. Christopher is under a lot of pressure right now. The firm is evaluating partner tracks and optics matter more than they should. If the wrong people see those videos, Maggie interrupted her softly, if they see me talking about my loneliness, they might think my son has not been a very good son. Brooke looked up fast. And they might think, Maggie went on, that his wife did not do quite as much as she likes to believe she did. For a second, Brooke didn't move. The room around them stayed exactly as it had been. Plates arriving, glasses refilled, sunlight caught in the window frames. Somewhere behind Maggie, a woman was describing Cabo in a voice that suggested Cabo existed mainly to verify good decisions. Brooke set her fork down. That is not what this is about. Maggie did not answer. Brooke's eyes had changed. Not wet yet, just unprotected in a new way. Maggie knew that look. It was the look of a person who had walked into a room certain of the furniture and just hit their shin on something they had sworn was not there. I've tried, Brooke said. It came out smaller than the rest. Maggie believed her. That was the trouble. Brooke had tried, in the ways Brooke knew how to try. Holiday gifts chosen well, correct flowers, invitations when required, a seat at the table, a reminder text about the children's games. Brooke had performed care with consistency and real effort. She simply had not noticed that performance was not the same thing as room. Maggie looked at her daughter-in-law and, for one quick unwelcome moment, saw, not a villain, but a younger woman in a more expensive life, still arranging herself to keep every wall from cracking. It softened something in Maggie and saddened it at the same time. I know, she said. That was worse than if she had been cruel. Brooke's eyes filled then. She turned her face slightly, enough to avoid the full indignity of crying head-on in a restaurant where people wore gold bracelets to lunch. Maggie. You make me sound heartless. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The server came by to ask whether everything looked good. Brooke smiled without showing teeth and said, "Yes, thank you, perfect." Maggie almost admired the discipline of it. When the server moved on, Brooke took a breath that did not quite settle. "I love Christopher," she said. "I love my children. I'm trying to protect my family." There it was. My family. The pronoun sat cleanly on the table between them. Not malicious. Not accidental either. Maggie looked at Brooke's untouched salad. "Yes," she said. Something in Brooke's face gave way. She shook her head once, a small, unbelieving movement, as if she had not intended to reveal herself so neatly. Her eyes were wet now, and she hated it. Maggie could see that too. Brooke did not mind tears in theory. Tears were useful in the right setting. But these had arrived without her consent. "This is awful," Brooke said. Maggie picked up one half of her sandwich. "Is it?" Brooke stared at her. "You're making this hurt on purpose." Maggie set the sandwich back down. "No." "Then why would you say it like that?" "Like what?" Brooke laughed once, under her breath, the sound of someone losing patience with a game she no longer believed was a game. "I asked you here to try to make peace." "No," Maggie said quietly. "You asked me here to make this smaller." Brooke's napkin slipped from her lap to the floor. She bent for it too quickly, came back up with her face pinker than before, and then, to Maggie's surprise, tears spilled over anyway. Not sobbing, not a scene, just a breach. A woman in a nice restaurant losing control of her face. At another table, nobody looked. Scottsdale was too well trained for that. Brooke stood. "Maggie, you are really hurting me." The sentence was true enough to be useful, but not the truth underneath. Maggie stayed seated. "I'm sorry this hurts," she said. Brooke gave a small, disbelieving shake of her head. She reached for her purse with a hand that was no longer steady and dragged the strap over her shoulder. "I can't do this." "I know." Again, the gentleness made it worse. Brooke looked at her as if Maggie had broken some important rule of womanhood by refusing either to soothe or to explode. Then she turned and walked out. She moved quickly, but not wildly, her back straight, one hand rising halfway to her face and then falling again when she remembered where she was. Maggie watched her cross the restaurant, speak to no one, pass through the glass doors into the white noon light outside. Only when Brooke had gone did Maggie look down at the table. The salad sat barely touched. The dressing remained in its little cup. Brooke's water glass had a lipstick mark near the rim, coral pink and exact. Maggie picked up her sandwich again and took one bite. It had gone cooler than it should have, but it was still lunch. The check did not take long. Brooke had left before asking for it. Maggie had known she would. When the server brought the leather folder, Maggie opened it and paid for both meals without comment. The woman thanked her in the same pleasant tone she had used all afternoon. Nothing in the room suggested anything unusual had occurred. That was one of the ugliest things about public pain. It almost never improved the furniture. Outside, the heat hit hard and clean. Maggie stood for a moment beside her car before getting in. The parking lot shimmered. Across the way, Brooke's SUV was already gone. On the drive home, Maggie kept both hands on the wheel and did not turn on the radio. Scottsdale moved past in its usual expensive calm. Stone walls, golf course green, women in sunglasses carrying iced drinks large enough to count as weather. At a red light, she caught her own face in the rearview mirror and thought, not for the first time, that sorrow aged differently than anger. Less dramatic, more permanent. She reached home just before 3. The house was cool inside, quiet in the familiar way. She set her purse on the hall table, took off her shoes, and went to the living room without first opening the mail or rinsing the lunch taste out of her mouth. The room looked untouched by her day. She sat down on the sofa and let the silence gather. Brooke had cried because Maggie had said the true thing too plainly. Not all the true things, only one. And even now, Maggie did not feel angry with her. That was what left the deepest ache. If Brooke had been cruel, stupid, openly contemptuous, the whole thing would have settled more easily in the body. But Brooke was not that. Brooke was a woman who had learned, a long time ago, that harmony had to be maintained, appearances translated into effort, and difficult people absorbed without ever quite letting them in. Maggie knew that woman, had once been some version of her herself. That was what made lunch feel less like a fight than a glimpse of an inheritance no one had asked for. After a while, Maggie reached for her phone. She opened TikTok and set the phone against the sugar jar in the kitchen, the way she usually did. The camera came on. Her face appeared in the screen. Tired, composed enough. She hit record. "Today," she said, "my daughter-in-law took me to lunch." She paused, looking not at herself, but at the small dark circle of the lens. "I thought it was a nice gesture." Another pause. "Then I realized she had never asked what I wanted to eat." Maggie stopped there. No anger, no explanation, nothing sharpened for performance. She watched it once. In the replay, her voice sounded almost matter-of-fact. Only the last word carried the weight. She posted it and turned the phone face down on the counter. The house remained quiet around her. Somewhere outside, a sprinkler clicked on in a neighboring yard. Maggie stood in the kitchen a little longer, one hand resting against the cool edge of the counter, as if waiting for something else to arrive. Nothing did. That, too, she thought, was a kind of answer. The lawyer in the line. Christopher closed the office door before making the call, though nobody was home to hear him. The room was cool from the vent above the bookshelf and smelled faintly of paper, printer toner, and the coffee he had let go cold an hour earlier. Through the window behind his desk, he could see a slice of the back lawn and, beyond the wall, the top of a Palo Verde lifting in the dry wind. It was mid-morning. Brooke had taken the kids to school and then gone on to Pilates. The house should have felt efficient and empty in the satisfying way it usually did when everyone else was gone. It did not. Christopher sat down, opened his legal pad, and dialed the number from the website again before he could talk himself out of it. Elder Law and Advocacy Group. The name had annoyed him on sight. Too soft. Too self-righteous. Still, the woman who answered sounded brisk and normal. He asked for the attorney he'd been referred to. She put him through after a short wait that made him aware of his own pulse in the side of his neck. A man came on the line. Calm voice. Older. The kind of voice that had long ago learned how to sound reasonable over bad news. Christopher introduced himself and said, "I have a general question." "Of course." "It's about a family member, an older family member." The attorney made a neutral sound that could mean anything. Christopher adjusted the pen in his hand. "She's active online, more than I realized. Posting personal information, interacting with strangers. I'm concerned she may be putting herself at risk." The attorney did not rush to fill the silence. Christopher disliked him a little for that. "What kind of risk?" the man asked. "Emotional manipulation. Financial scams, exploitation, I don't know yet." Christopher looked at the legal pad and wrote nothing. "I'm asking what options exist if someone older is making unsafe decisions and won't listen." The attorney said, "Unsafe how?" Christopher stared at the grain of the desk. "Publicly discussing private matters, building relationships with people she doesn't know, potentially being influenced." A pause. "Has she lost money?" "No." "Given anyone access to accounts?" "No." "Any signs of cognitive decline?" Christopher's hand tightened around the pen. "No." "Then you're not talking about incapacity," the attorney said. "You're talking about judgment." Christopher almost said, "What's the difference?" Instead, he said, "I'm talking about someone vulnerable." Again, the attorney let the sentence sit. "There are legal tools," he said finally. "They are not light tools. Guardianship, conservatorship, emergency petitions in rare cases. But those require evidence of incapacity or immediate danger, not simply that a person is behaving in ways their family dislikes." Christopher felt heat move up his neck. "That's not what I said." "No," the attorney said, "it isn't." Christopher looked toward the closed office door. What if the conduct is self-destructive? What if it is? The question came back to him so cleanly it almost felt rude. Christopher wrote guardianship in the margin, then underlined it too hard. The attorney went on, "If you're worried about scams, there are practical steps. Financial monitoring with consent, account security, device checks, conversations. But if your relative is competent, she is allowed to be embarrassing, lonely, impulsive, theatrical, secretive, or stubborn on the internet, same as anyone else." Embarrassing. The word went through him like a pin. He forced a short laugh. "That's not really how I'd phrase it." "No," the attorney said again, "probably not." The consultation lasted 18 minutes. Christopher paid for it with a card saved to the firm account he used for personal overflow and signed off with a tone that suggested useful progress had been made. When the line disconnected, he remained seated, the silent phone still in his hand. On the legal pad, the notes looked worse than useless. Guardianship, consent, no incapacity, practical steps. The words did not organize themselves into help. They only made him feel as though he had walked to a locked door and then been told the door was not technically for him. He tore the sheet off, folded it once, and put it in the desk drawer. A minute later, his laptop chimed with the payment receipt. He glanced at it and let the email sit unread in the corner of the screen. That afternoon, Maggie came over to watch the children for an hour and a half while Brooke went to a workout class and Christopher took a late call upstairs. Nothing about the day suggested betrayal in advance. The kitchen at Christopher's house was bright enough to make everything feel scrubbed. White counters, pale oak floors, a bowl of oranges no one was allowed to eat because Brooke liked the color there. Logan wanted popcorn. Ava wanted the iPad because she had promised to show Maggie how to add music under a video without making it look ancient. Christopher had said hello from the stairs and then disappeared toward his office with his phone in one hand and his reading glasses in the other. Maggie stood at the island and listened to the house arrange itself around her. Brooke was already halfway to the garage. "I'll be back by 4:30, she said, kissing the air beside Maggie's cheek. "If Logan asks for gummies, the answer is no." "He'll ask anyway," Maggie said. Brooke laughed. "Exactly." Then she was gone. Logan dragged a stool across the kitchen tile for the popcorn. Ava was already digging through a pile of chargers in the family room, muttering to herself in a tone so close to Christopher's it made Maggie want to smile and not smile at the same time. "Grandma," Ava called. "The iPad's dead." "It's probably not. It's on 1%. That's practically dead." Maggie found the charger plugged into the side outlet near the cookbook shelf. She connected it and set the iPad against the toaster. The screen woke immediately. An email banner slid down across the top before she could hand it over. "Payment received. Elder Law and Advocacy Group." Maggie went still. The banner did not stay long. It didn't need to. Ava was saying something about needing to show her where the sound library was. Logan had managed to knock over 3 kernels before the popcorn bag was even open. Somewhere upstairs, Christopher's voice carried faintly through a floor vent, controlled and professional and entirely occupied by another world. Maggie looked at the iPad screen. She did not open the email. She did not need to. The words themselves were enough. Not just the law group, the fact of payment, the fact of consultation, the fact that somewhere, in a room with a desk and a pen and his good watch turned toward the hour, her son had called a stranger to ask what could legally be done about her. Ava came around the counter and reached for the iPad. "Got it?" Maggie handed it over. "Yes, sweetheart." Ava glanced at her briefly, then back to the screen. If she saw anything, she chose not to ask. For the next hour, Maggie helped Logan measure popcorn into bowls and listened to Ava explain the difference between using popular audio and desperate audio, whatever that meant. She read aloud from a fantasy book because Logan claimed her dragon voices were less embarrassing than his mother's. She stood in the spotless kitchen and sliced apple wedges no one finished. She did every ordinary thing correctly. Only underneath it, something had altered so completely it made the house look different. At 4:20, Christopher came downstairs, still in his work shirt, sleeves rolled. "Everything good?" Maggie looked at him. He had no idea she knew. "Yes," she said. "Thanks again for coming by." "Of course." He took Logan's empty bowl to the sink. Ava was bent over the iPad on the sofa, one headphone in, one out. The room looked normal enough to frame. Maggie picked up her purse. "I should go." Christopher glanced up. "You don't have to rush." "I know." He smiled faintly, distracted. "See you Sunday?" Maggie put one hand on the back of the kitchen stool before answering. "Maybe," she said. Then she left before the word had time to settle strangely. At home, she did not turn on any lights right away. The late afternoon had passed into that hour when the house seemed to retreat from itself. The pool outside the back doors held a dull blue-gray shine. The living room kept its shapes but lost its edges. Maggie set her purse on the floor beside the sofa and sat down without removing her shoes. She had imagined many possible injuries from Christopher. Harsh words, patronizing lists, a refusal to understand. Those were still injuries, and they had come. This felt colder, because it had happened elsewhere, in private, in a voice she had not heard. He had gone around her, around the possibility of being answered. He had taken her existence to a professional and asked what could be done with it. Maggie leaned back and looked at the dark window. She did not cry. She did not feel particularly angry either, which disappointed her a little. Anger would at least have generated heat. This was more like standing barefoot on tile after midnight, a clean indoor cold. After a while, her phone buzzed once, then again, then kept going in small, restless bursts against the side table. Comments, messages, likes. The life she had made in that other room. The one her son could not enter without naming it a problem. She picked up the phone and opened the camera. For a moment, she only looked at herself. The living room behind her was dim. Her face in the screen looked older than it had at lunch last week, more exact. Then she pressed record. "There are people," she said, "who love you so much they want to control the way you exist." She stopped there, almost, then continued. "They call it concern." A pause. "I call it a cage." She ended the video before she could improve it or explain it. 40 seconds, maybe less. When she watched it back, her voice sounded steady. Too steady, perhaps. But steadiness had been mistaken for agreement in that family for years. Let it be mistaken for something else now. She posted it. Then she set the phone face down and left the room. The video passed 1 million views in under 2 days. Brooke saw it because a friend from church texted her the link with 3 shocked face emojis and the message, "Is this Maggie?" By then, the comments had split into tribes: concern, projection, amateur diagnosis, fury on behalf of strangers, Women telling stories Maggie had never asked to hold. The phrase "control the way you exist" had been copied into captions and stitched into people's own tearful videos and posted over black screens with piano music under it. Brooke sent the link to Christopher without commentary. Christopher watched it once at his desk and then again in his car after work, as if the location might change the meaning. It did not. The video did not name him. That was almost worse. It left room for him to recognize himself, without being able to argue with specifics. The comments were unbearable in their confidence. Somebody's son is trying to manage her life. Older women are not children. Protect this woman from her helpers. The people who say they're worried are always the jailers. He shut the app, opened it again, then shut it once more. 12, he called Maggie. No answer. 19, he called again. No answer. 3 again. He left no voicemail. What would he say? Mom, I saw the thing you made about me after I quietly explored legal ways to restrain your choices. The language would not hold still long enough. 30, he was driving to her house. He did not call first. The streets in her neighborhood were quieter at that hour, the golf carts gone, porch lights on, the heat finally backing off into something merely stubborn. When he pulled into the driveway at exactly 9, Maggie's living room lamp was still on. He got out and crossed the porch fast enough to feel foolish and not slow down. He knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Maggie stood there in a dark blue blouse and slacks, as if she had not undressed for the evening yet, or had dressed again after doing so. Her hand stayed on the door. She did not step back. Christopher had expected many things in the drive over. Fury, tears, evasion. Not this small withholding of entry. Mom. Yes? You're not answering your phone. I noticed. He looked at her face, searching it for some sign that they were still in a family conversation, not something else. The porch light cast soft shadows into the lines beside her mouth. Can I come in? Maggie did not move. What for? He stared at her. To talk. We've done that recently. The dry calm of it pushed him past whatever approach he had planned. You posted about me. No, Maggie said. I posted about a cage. His breath caught at the accuracy of that answer, though it was not the accuracy he would have granted aloud. Mom, do you have any idea how this looks? She kept one hand on the door. Yes, I'm serious. So am I. Christopher took one step closer, lowering his voice as if volume were the problem. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Maggie's face changed then, but only slightly. Not triumph, not cruelty. Something sadder and much less useful to him. You hurt me, she said, in front of one person. Christopher went still. The night around them stayed warm and dry. A sprinkler clicked somewhere down the street. One of the neighbors' wind chimes moved once, then settled. He said, You think I'm trying to hurt you? I think you called a lawyer. He looked at her. There it was at last, dragged into the open space between them with no ceremony. Christopher's mouth opened and closed again. For 1 second, he considered lying, denying, asking how she knew. All of it useless. I was trying to understand my options. Maggie's grip on the door did not change. Your options. I was worried. For me? Yes. The word came too quickly and landed poorly. Maggie tilted her head a fraction. Were you? Something in him flared. Do you have any idea how many nights I've been awake because of this? He said. Do you know what it's like wondering what kind of people are watching you, messaging you, filling your head with, my head. You know what I mean. No, Maggie said. I know what you say. He ran a hand over his face. I'm trying here. No, you're managing. He stared past her shoulder into the house he had not been invited into. The hallway lamp was on. A framed school picture of himself was visible on the far wall, small and red-sweatered and unbearable. Mom, I am doing everything I can to protect you. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, Are you worried about me, Christopher, or are you worried about the mirror? He did not understand at first, or understood too quickly and resented it. What? The mirror, Maggie said. The one where you look at yourself and see a good son. He said nothing. That was answer enough. Maggie inhaled once, lightly, and it seemed to cost her more than the rest of the exchange had. You chose a lawyer, she said, before you chose a chair. Christopher looked at her as if she had said something unfair, theatrical, deliberately wounding. But beneath that, something else moved in his face. Something closer to being seen than he could bear. He stepped back first. I can't do this tonight. Maggie almost smiled. Not from amusement, from recognition. That had always been his line, in one form or another. As a boy, as a teenager, as a man in a pressed shirt with a mortgage and children and a perfectly defended life. He left conversations the moment they stopped allowing him to remain himself in the easy ways. No, she said, I imagine you can't. Christopher looked at her once more, perhaps waiting for rescue, for the old furniture to reassemble itself around him. It did not. He turned and walked back toward the driveway. Maggie watched him go, watched him open the car door, stand there 1 second longer than necessary, then get inside. The headlights came on. The engine started. He backed out without looking up again. Only after the car had turned the corner did Maggie close the door. This time the sound of it was not loud, just final enough to stay in the room after it happened. The ultimatum. Christopher came 3 days later. By then, the video had gone far enough that Maggie no longer checked the numbers. The first morning she had looked because not looking would have been its own kind of theater. After that, she stopped. The comments kept coming anyway. Her phone lit up in clusters on the kitchen counter, on the side table in the living room. Once at 2:14 in the morning when she was awake and did not reach for it. Thursday passed, then Friday. On Saturday afternoon, she changed the sheets, watered the herbs in the back, and ate half a peach standing over the sink. On Sunday, she did not hear from Christopher, which was new enough to register and old enough to make sense. Monday evening, just before sunset, his SUV turned into the driveway. Maggie saw it through the front window before he rang the bell. She was already in the living room, sitting in her chair with a book open on her lap and the lamp on beside her. The room held the late-day heat in a softened way. Outside, the sky over Scottsdale had gone pale and wide, the color of dust with light inside it. Pool water moved faintly behind the glass doors, stirred by the filter. When the bell rang, she did not hurry. Christopher was standing in the middle of the front porch when she opened the door. No children, no Brooke, no grocery bag or pharmacy pickup or practical object to justify the visit. He wore a blue button-down with the sleeves down, not rolled, and dark slacks. He had come directly from work, or wanted it to look that way. "Mom," Christopher. He stepped inside without waiting for her to say he should. That small presumption felt almost antique now. Something from the years when all the doors in his life had opened into his being the son. Maggie closed the door behind him. He did not sit. That was the first thing she noticed. In every other hard conversation, even the badly managed ones, he had at least gone through the shape of ordinary behavior, a chair, a table, an offered drink refused. This time he stopped in the center of the living room with his arms folded and remained there, as if standing would protect him from something seated people had to admit. Maggie sat back down in her chair. The book stayed in her lap, closed now. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. The room was neat in the way loneliness sometimes made rooms neat. Every object returned to its place because nobody else would disturb it. Frank's old brass clock on the mantel. A tray with coasters no guest ever used correctly. The rug Brooke had once said was surprisingly modern, sounding both complimentary and faintly shocked. Christopher looked around once, not really at the room, then he said, "I talked to someone." Maggie kept her hands on the book. "I thought about this a lot," he said. "More than you probably think." She waited. He unfolded one arm and ran a hand over the back of his neck, then folded it again. "I've spoken to a professional. I've looked at what options there are. I've tried to come at this reasonably." Maggie looked at his face and said nothing. He was doing that thing again, laying down boards ahead of himself, so he could cross the conversation without getting wet. Christopher took a breath. "I've made a decision." The word dropped into the room and stayed there. Maggie's eyes moved briefly to the darkening window over his shoulder and back. "Have you?" It was not a question. He treated it as one anyway. "Yes." He uncrossed his arms now, but only so he could put both hands on his hips, thumbs hooked back as if he were holding himself upright by structure alone. "This can't go on. The videos, the public stuff, the way this has spiraled. It's not healthy." Maggie looked down at the book in her lap. It was a library novel she had renewed twice and barely read. Her finger rested between pages 78 and 79, though she had not marked her place with any intention of returning to it. Christopher went on, "So here's where I'm at." He stopped then, perhaps because the phrase sounded too much like a corporate meeting even to his own ears. He tried again. "I think you need to take the channel down," he said. "Completely. Delete it. And I think you need to talk to someone. A real therapist. Or a doctor. Or both." Maggie raised her eyes. Christopher continued before she could speak. "And if you won't, then I'm not bringing the kids over here anymore." The sentence landed cleanly. No shouting, no dramatic emphasis, no cracked voice. It arrived in the same tone he might have used to explain a policy change at work or a necessary repair on a property he managed. That was what made it crueler. Maggie did not move. Christopher heard the words after he said them and, for a second, seemed almost to brace against the fact that they were now in the room with him. "I don't want them around this," he added. Maggie's voice, when it came, was quiet. "Around what?" Christopher looked at her and then away. Past her shoulder toward the doorway, toward the framed mirror in the hall, anywhere but directly where the question had been placed. "You know what I mean. No, she said. I don't. Tell me. He exhaled, quick, impatient. Mom. Tell me. The house was quiet enough that Maggie could hear the filter cycling on outside. Water moved through pipes with a low private rush. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed and was followed by nothing. Christopher said it too fast, as if speed might reduce the damage. Desperate. Brit. The word was out. It did not echo. It didn't need to. It sat there like something dropped on tile. Hard. Unmistakable. Maggie looked at him. She did not feel the jolt he might have expected. Not exactly. By then, she had already been cut in so many organized ways that this felt less like a fresh wound than a bright light suddenly turned on in a room she had been navigating in the dark. Christopher's face altered almost immediately after the word left him. Not remorse. Not yet. More like a man hearing himself from outside and disliking the sound too late to claim it belonged to someone else. That's not, he began. Maggie kept looking at him. He stopped. Because there was no helpful revision for it. The word had come from wherever words came from when people were too frightened to keep them dressed. Maggie saw then, not clearly and not kindly, a man standing in her living room who was more afraid than he could afford to know. Afraid of looking negligent, afraid of being seen through the wrong frame. Afraid that her loneliness, spoken plainly enough, might become evidence against him. In a court no one had formally convened, but everyone already lived inside. She could not rescue him from that. Not anymore. Maggie set the book down on the side table and stood. Christopher's shoulders shifted. For 1 second he looked relieved, as though standing meant engagement, argument, some more ordinary form of battle he could still conduct. But Maggie did not step toward him. She walked past the coffee table, past the lamp, past the framed photograph of Frank holding a garden hose with 1 foot bare in the grass, and opened the front door. Evening air entered the house, warm still, but thinner now. Outside, the porch light had not yet come on. The last of the day was draining out of the sky. Maggie stepped back from the door and said, "Then don't come anymore." Christopher did not move. "What?" "If that's your decision," Maggie said, "then don't come." He stared at her. The front door stood open between them and the world outside. The threshold looked almost absurdly ordinary. Tile, mat, 1 leaf caught in the corner from some earlier wind. "You can't do that," he said. Maggie kept one hand on the edge of the door. "I just did." Christopher took a step toward her now, not quite pleading, not yet angry in the old, easy way. More disoriented than that. He had come ready to issue terms. He had not come ready for acceptance. "Mom, be reasonable." The phrase passed through her like something ancient and used up. "Reasonable?" she repeated. "Yes. And what would that look like?" "You know what it would look like. I'd like to hear you say it." He gave a short, disbelieving shake of his head. "I'm asking you to step back, delete the account, get help, spend time in the real world. Let this calm down. Then we can figure out what normal looks like again." Normal. Sundays at 2. Questions asked from the doorway. A son managing, a mother minimizing, a daughter-in-law arranging napkins around the absence of real speech. Maggie looked at him and felt something in her settle. Not harden, settle. For years she had mistaken endurance for love, because endurance was measurable and love in that family had grown increasingly procedural. She had believed that if she kept the tone mild enough, the room orderly enough, the needs small enough, then something essential might survive inside the structure. Instead, the structure had learned to feed on her silence. Christopher said, "Why are you doing this?" She almost smiled at the question. Not from amusement. From the old, familiar ache of hearing him ask the one thing that let him remain innocent. "I'm not doing something to you," she said. He looked stricken by the sentence, though she had not raised her voice. "Mom, I'm trying to protect this family." There it was again. This family. She heard the edges of it now, the way one hears a crack in a plate once it has been pointed out. Maggie said, "Then protect it somewhere else." Christopher's mouth opened, closed. He turned halfway toward the porch, then back, as if the body were preparing to leave before the mind had given permission. His voice dropped lower. "Do you know how many nights I've stayed awake because of this?" Maggie thought of the email banner on the iPad, the law firm invoice, the lunch Brooke had dressed for like damage control, the word desperate sitting between them, still warm. "You stayed awake," she said, "and then you came here with punishment." "That's not fair." "No," Maggie said, "it's accurate." He stood very still. For a moment she thought he might actually say something true. Not neat, not strategic, something ugly enough to matter. But the moment passed over his face like a shadow over water and was gone. Christopher stepped backward onto the porch. Maggie could see he was not done, not internally. There were whole speeches still lined up inside him. Explanations, charges. facts that made him look responsible and her unstable. He turned once on the porch as though to offer one last sentence that might force the evening back into a shape he could survive. But Maggie was already closing the door. Not fast, not with anger, that was the part that changed everything. She closed it because if she left it open, she would have to choose again. She would have to watch his face, hear the catch in his voice, let motherhood pour itself back into the cracks and seal over what had finally been named. She would have to become manageable to him again. She could not do that. The latch settled. The sound was small. On the other side of the door, there was silence. Then the faint shift of his steps across the porch boards. Then farther away on the walkway. Then the opening and closing of the car door. The engine turned over, sat running. Then the SUV backed out and left. Maggie stood in the hallway for a moment, without moving. The house around her felt larger than before, but not emptier, just more honestly occupied. She went back to the living room and sat in her chair again. The book remained on the side table. The lamp cast the same soft light across the rug. Out beyond the glass doors, the pool held one rectangle of blue in the dark yard. She listened to the absence of his car until even that was gone. Her phone lay on the coffee table within reach. She did not pick it up. She did not open TikTok. Did not call anyone. Did not walk the rooms, restlessly checking locks that were already locked. She sat there in the 4-bedroom house her husband had left behind, alone in the fullest sense of the word. And for the first time since Frank died, the aloneness did not feel like something being done to her. It felt chosen. The mother you see. 14 days passed without a call. Not one from Maggie to Christopher, not one from Christopher to Maggie. The silence had a different shape from the old one. The old silence had been padded. It came with routines, with Sunday visits, with grocery bags and practical questions, and everyone agreeing not to notice what was missing. This one had edges. It had happened on purpose. Maggie moved through her days inside it. She watered the rosemary. She answered comments. She went to the grocery store on a Tuesday morning and bought too many peaches because they smelled right. She did not sit beside the phone waiting for it to ring, but she noticed when it did not. That was different from waiting. She told herself so and believed it most of the time. Christopher moved through the silence less cleanly. On the 4th night, Brooke found him standing in the kitchen after midnight with the refrigerator open and nothing in his hand. "You're not sleeping," she said. He shut the door. I'm fine." Brooke leaned against the island. She wore one of his old college t-shirts and had taken off her makeup hours ago. Without the earrings and the polished clothes and the good lighting, she looked younger, less arranged, and more tired. "That's not what I said." Christopher picked up a water glass, realized it was already full, put it back down. Brooke watched him for a second. "You could call her." He gave a short laugh that didn't make it all the way out. "And say what?" Brooke did not answer that, because they both knew the problem. He had plenty of sentences, none that could cross the distance. Later that week, after the children were in bed and the house had gone still, except for the dishwasher, Christopher went into the family room and took the iPad from the side table where Ava had left it plugged in. The case was bright blue and cracked in one corner. There were sticky fingerprints on the screen. He sat in the armchair by the lamp and opened TikTok. For a second, his mother's account appeared exactly as he remembered it. Profile picture, follower count. The line under her name. Only the number had climbed again. He noticed it and then stopped himself from doing anything with the noticing. He scrolled to the bottom. Back to the first one. His mother in the dark kitchen at 3:47 in the morning, hair flattened on one side, robe loose at the neck. He watched her say, "I don't know what to do with 8 hours every day," and this time he did not stop there. He let the next one play and the next. Maggie talking about dinner for one. Maggie laughing over funeral casseroles. Maggie telling the story about lip balm at Frank's bedside. And then, for one unguarded second, turning her face away from the phone as if she had forgotten it was there. Maggie laughing at the orange cat with church lady disapproval. Maggie sitting by the pool at dusk and saying she wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, so much as waiting to matter enough for someone to think of her without a reminder. He watched that one twice. The room around him stayed dim and expensive and still. The lamp threw a soft yellow pool over the rug. Beyond the windows, the backyard was black glass. Somewhere upstairs, Logan rolled over in bed and the floor creaked faintly. Christopher sat in that chair and kept going. He watched the lunch video. He watched the cage video. He watched the yoga video, where Maggie sounded dry and nearly amused when she said she hated yoga. He watched videos that had never been meant for him and then understood, with growing shame, that of course some part of them had always been for him. Not performatively. Not indirectly. Simply because she had been saying in public what she had not been allowed to say in private. Around 1:30, he stood up, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and left it untouched on the counter. Around 2:15, Brooke came halfway downstairs in the dark and found him still watching. She stayed on the stairs, one hand on the railing. "How long have you been sitting here?" Christopher did not look up. "A while." Brooke listened for a moment. Maggie's voice came quietly from the iPad. Something about the empty hours after dinner. Something about how evenings could lie to you. Brooke's face changed. She came down 2 more steps, then stopped again. "Do you want me to—" "No." He didn't say it sharply, just simply. He couldn't explain why her staying would make it harder, only that it would. This was not about winning a marriage conversation or making a case. This was the first time, in any real way, he had let the thing reach him without rushing to classify it. Brooke nodded. Before she turned back upstairs, she said, "Don't defend yourself while you're watching." Then she left him there. At 3 in the morning, Christopher watched the first video where Maggie mentioned him directly only by outline. A son, a lunch, a person who wanted to protect through control. He watched them all. His face remained still through most of it, but his body had started giving him away. His hand stayed over his mouth. His shoulders rounded. Once he paused the video and pressed the heel of his palm into one eye so hard it hurt. The crying, when it came was not dramatic. No collapse, no clean revelation. He simply got to the video of Maggie saying she did not need to be fixed, only seen, and the room blurred. He took off his glasses and sat there with them in one hand, breathing through his nose and failing at that, too. He had spent weeks defending himself from the wrong accusation. He had told himself he was not cruel, not neglectful, not one of those sons. He had groceries on Sundays, a pharmacy app full of reminders, a running list in his notes app of repairs at her house. He had presence, logistics, concern. He had not had sight. Somewhere close to dawn, the iPad battery dipped into red and the lamp began to look tired. Christopher set the device face down on the coffee table and sat in the quiet. Upstairs, a toilet flushed. Pipes knocked softly in the wall. His own house, the one he had built so carefully, felt strange around him. Less like evidence, more like an arrangement. The clock on the cable box read 3:42. He did not sleep. Wednesday morning, Maggie was at the kitchen sink rinsing blueberries when her phone lit up with Christopher's name. She stood still with the water running over her fingers. It was not Sunday. That registered first. She turned off the tap and looked at the screen until it almost stopped ringing. Then she answered, "Hello." There was no sound at first beyond breath. Then Christopher said very quietly, "I watched them." Maggie leaned one hip against the counter. "All of them?" A pause. "Most. Enough." His voice was roughened in a way she had never heard from him in daylight. "I started from the first one." The kitchen around her remained ordinary. Wet blueberries in the colander, dish towel on the counter, sunlight reaching across the floor in one hard Arizona stripe. The fridge humming beside her as if this were a normal morning. Christopher said, "I didn't know." Maggie closed her eyes briefly. No defense followed, no but, no explanation of intent, just that. When she did not answer, he went on, "I kept seeing you as a—" He stopped. Maggie waited. "A mother," he said at last. "A person I needed to manage, protect, fix." He swallowed. "Not a person, not really." His voice broke slightly on the last 2 words. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough to make pretending impossible. Maggie put one hand flat on the counter to steady herself, though she was not dizzy. On the line, Christopher said, "I'm sorry." Still, she said nothing, because what was there to say quickly that wouldn't reduce it? Then he added, "I didn't see you." That was the sentence that did it. Maggie covered her mouth with her free hand and let the tears come without trying to organize them. They were not neat tears, not useful ones. They had been waiting in the body too long for neatness. Christopher heard it and began to cry too, not loudly but openly enough that there was no room left for either of them to preserve pride. They stayed on the phone like that for a while, breathing and not pretending not to. When Christopher spoke again, he sounded younger and older at once. "Can I come over tonight?" Maggie lowered her hand. "Yeah," she said. He came after dinner with a small bakery box in one hand. Not flowers, not a practical item, not a folder. A cake, slightly lopsided from the drive, with white frosting and no message written on it. Brooke had stayed home with the children. When Christopher told her where he was going, she had only nodded and said, "I'll be here." He understood the sentence for what it was and what it wasn't. Permission, distance, a boundary that was not punishment. Maggie opened the door before he knocked a second time. For a second, neither of them moved. Christopher looked tired. Not in the handsome, overworked way successful men like to wear. Tired around the eyes, tired in the mouth. He held the cake box slightly awkwardly, like a man uncertain whether gifts belonged in this sort of visit. "Hi," he said. "Hi." She stepped back. "Come in." This time he waited for the invitation. The living room lamps were on, no tea tray, no formal arrangement, just the room as it usually was in the evening. Warm pools of light, one cushion slightly sunken where Maggie sat most nights, the blue reflection of the pool moving faintly across the glass doors. Christopher set the cake on the coffee table. "I didn't know what to bring." Maggie looked at it. Cake is rarely offensive. That got a small, surprised sound out of him. Not quite a laugh, but near enough. They sat on the sofa, not opposite each other like adversaries, but with a cushion between them. For a minute, neither spoke. Christopher looked down at his hands. "I watched the one where you said you waited by the phone." Maggie folded her hands in her lap. "And the one about dinner and the church committee cat and—" He stopped, started again. "I watched the one about Brooke, too." She nodded once. He drew a breath. "I thought if you stopped doing TikTok, things would go back to normal." Maggie looked at him. Christopher gave the faintest shake of his head. But it wasn't normal before that. It was just quiet. The sentence stayed simple enough to be true. Maggie reached over then and laid her hand over one of his. He went very still. "Christopher," she said, "I don't need you to fix me." He stared at their hands. "I know," he said. "I need you to see me." The room held the words without decoration. No swelling music, no perfect tearful timing, nothing except the weight of the hand she had placed over his and the fact that she had not moved it away. Christopher turned his hand beneath hers and held on. "I do," he said. Then after a second, more plainly, "I see you now." Maggie looked at him. There were still too many lost Sundays inside them. Too many years of management and politeness and wrong language. But for the first time since Frank died, she believed the sentence before she tested it. She squeezed his hand once. They ate cake from mismatched plates in the kitchen because neither felt like making the moment ceremonial. Christopher stayed until nearly 10. They talked some and did not talk some. He told her Ava had started correcting his captions. Maggie told him Logan had hidden one of Frank's old golf balls in the rosemary bush months ago, for luck, and she still had not moved it. He apologized again once, less formally this time, with his eyes on the sink. Maggie did not say "I forgive you" because forgiveness, she thought, would cheapen the work still ahead. Instead, she touched his arm and let that stand. When he left, he hugged her first. Outside, the night air smelled faintly of dust and orange blossoms from a neighbor's tree. 3 months later, Maggie had 210,000 followers and a half-finished memoir in a Word document that made her want to throw the laptop some days and laugh on others. Christopher came on Saturdays now. Not every single Saturday because life was still life and children still had schedules, and one weekend there was a tournament and another there was a stomach virus, and once Maggie herself said no because she wanted the house to herself and meant it. But Saturdays had become the day. Not as obligation, as choice. He came in jeans sometimes, without groceries, without a list. Once, just to replace a light bulb and then stayed for soup. Another time he sat at her kitchen counter for 40 minutes while she chopped celery and told him about a woman in Nebraska who had sent her 3 pages of handwritten notes on widowhood and overwatering basil. Occasionally, he ended up in the edge of a video, a wave from the doorway, his voice from off-camera saying, "Mom, you forgot the salt." Once, under severe coercion from Ava, he leaned into frame and said, "Hello to all your TikTok grandchildren," then flushed red enough to make the comments section ecstatic. Brooke was slower, but she sent Maggie a new set of pans one Friday with a note tucked under the packing slip. "For your cooking videos, these will look better on camera. B." Maggie stood in the kitchen holding the note for a long time before setting it in the drawer beside the dish towels instead of throwing it away. Ava taught her how to add background music without making it look like a hostage video, which was apparently a technical category. The two of them sat shoulder to shoulder on the sofa, Maggie in her reading glasses, Ava stealing cookies from the plate between them, both of them laughing when Maggie accidentally overlaid a sentimental piano track onto a story about bad funeral casseroles. One evening in late August, Maggie filmed a video from the kitchen just as the light was starting to go soft. "Kids," she said into the phone, because by then that was sometimes how she addressed them all, the young and the old and the ones in between. "I have good news." She smiled before going on. "My son came to dinner tonight, and he didn't look at his watch once." She paused, one hand resting on the counter. "I think," she said, "maybe I'm not invisible anymore." She stopped the recording and was still smiling at the absurdity of having said it aloud when there was a knock at the front door. Maggie set the phone down and went to answer it. Christopher stood there with a small bakery box in one hand, sheepish, in a way 42-year-old men usually tried to avoid. "I forgot to congratulate you," he said. 210,000 followers. Maggie looked at the cake box. Christopher lifted it slightly. "I'm proud of you." For 1 second, she could not answer. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him. He hugged her back hard enough to matter. Across the street, a neighbor was coming in from watering her front pots. She glanced over, saw them on the porch, and smiled before going inside. Through the front window, Maggie could see the reflection of the kitchen light, and beyond it, her own house opened up and warm. She leaned closer to Christopher and said very softly near his ear, "Thank you." He held on a second longer. "For what?" Maggie closed her eyes. "For seeing me." When they stepped back, Christopher looked as if he might say something polished and failed at it, which was probably for the best. Instead, he held up the cake box again and said, "I got chocolate, I remembered." Maggie laughed. "Come in," she said. And this time, when he did not enter like a man checking a box.